The funeral was over, but something stayed in the mourner's chair, the seat that waited longer. In grief, some chairs are built to hold bodies, others are built to hold silence. And then there are the ones that were never built for the living, only to remember them. This story isn't about the dead. Not exactly. It's about what remains seated long after the procession ends, long after the flowers wilt, long after the tears dry on cheeks. No longer visited by memory. This story begins with a chair, but it ends with everything I had refused to sit with. I didn't plan to go to the funeral. That's the truth. I had heard about it from a cousin I barely spoke to, a name spoken in passing, a voice that trembled when it shouldn't have, a phrase I couldn't unhear. They say the chair moved. It should have been nothing. A superstition, an exaggeration, a family myth born of grief and wine. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything, because I knew the chair they meant. It was old, carved oak, dark as dried blood, upholstered with the kind of fabric that forgets nothing. Red velvet, faded like a wound, healing the wrong way. It had always been in the family, but no one remembered who brought it. Some said great-grandfather. Others said it came with the house. But I remember it being described once by my grandmother as the seat of silence. It was placed in the back right corner of every funeral we held, not by choice, not by design. It simply ended up there, and no one ever sat in it. Not the grieving, not the curious, not the weary pallbearers in need of rest, because everyone knew, somehow, without needing to be told, that chair was already occupied. I hadn't been back to the house in over a decade. It wasn't mine anymore. Not after I left without explanation, without goodbye. They said it was family matters, that I needed time. What they didn't know, what I didn't even fully understand, was that I wasn't running from the people. I was running from what the house remembered. But when the news came that Aunt Cecilia had passed, that the family was gathering again, that the chair had shifted an inch to the left during the vigil, I packed my things. I told myself it was guilt. I told myself it was closure. But in truth, I wanted to see if it would move for me. The house hadn't changed. Time had gathered in its corners like dust, paint peeled in slow confession. Windows wore the fingerprints of forgotten children. The air smelled of lavender and mold and something, older something, watching. They were all there, cousins, uncles, the occasional family friend who had forgotten the names but remembered the pain. And in the center, Aunt Cecilia, still, pale, fierce. Even in death, she had been many things, stern, sharp-tongued, unsentimental. But she had also been the last person who spoke openly about what the family refused to name. She used to say, grief doesn't leave, it just changes chairs. And there it was, in the back corner, exactly as I remembered, the mourner's chair. Only it looked different this time, not in appearance. In presence, it leaned slightly forward, as if listening, as if waiting, and for the first time in my life, I felt it notice me. I tried to ignore it, focused on the condolences, the rehearsed nods, the hugs that never reached the heart. But every time I looked back, the chair seemed closer, not physically, spiritually, as though it was drawing me in, or drawing something out. The service began. Hymns, eulogies, stories polished for public mourning. I listened. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't sad, but because something heavier than sorrow sat behind my ribs, a kind of knowing, a kind of waiting that, just before the closing prayer whisper, not in my ear, in my mind, not words, exactly, but shape, tone, like an invitation I had accepted long ago. I turned around, and the chair was empty, but not unoccupied. There was a shadow on it, one that didn't belong to any living person, and saw something else, a piece of folded parchment, on the seat after the service, while the others moved toward the kitchen, toward warmth and casserole and conversation. I walked to the chair, each step heavier, each breath louder. The parchment remained. I reached for it, hesitated, and then sat down. It was the first time anyone had sat in the chair in over 100 years. The room changed, not in temperature, in memory. The air thickened, the walls pulsed, the lights dimmed, though no one touched the switches. And then I heard her voice, "Aunt Cecilia," not from the grave, from the fabric, from the wood, from the place beneath the seat where generations had whispered their grief and never listened for. The reply, "You sat, so now you must remember." The letter was not from her, it was from me, or rather, from a version of me I had abandoned years ago. A letter I had written as a child, during the last funeral I had attended in that house, written to no one or to something to the silence. It read, "If I sit here long enough, maybe someone will notice. Maybe someone will remember me too." I felt my throat close, because I had forgotten writing it, because I had forgotten me. I stayed in the chair for hours. No one interrupted. No one approached, as if I had become invisible, or as if they knew that once the chair chooses you, you belong to it until it's done remembering. And I remembered to everything the games I played alone in the attic. The questions no one answered, the grief I swallowed so others could breathe. I remembered Aunt Cecilia's hand on my shoulder the day my mother left. Her whisper, "You don't need to speak your pain, love. This house already knows it." And it did. The chair. It wasn't haunted. It was sacred. It held the echoes of every unspoken sorrow. It kept them safe, kept them warm, till someone brave enough sat down to feel them. And now it was my turn. The house remembers what you forget. The house didn't change overnight. It never had to, because it never truly changed at all. It waited, quietly, patiently, like grief pressed between wallpaper seams, like a breath no one remembered holding. After the funeral, I stayed. The family filtered out, one by one, offering hugs that didn't land, promises to stay in touch that sounded like apologies. I said nothing. They didn't ask me to leave, because I think on some level they knew I already belonged to something else. Now, to the chair, to the memory, to the house. That night, I slept in my old room, or tried to. The bed creaked under bones that had forgotten what softness felt like. The window looked out onto the backyard, where the trees stood too still for windless branches. The air had weight. It's a kind of presence that leaned just above my chest, not threatening, just waiting. And then, at 3:13 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps. Not on the stairs, but above me, the attic. I froze. Not from fear, from recognition. I used to hear them when I was a child. Always at 3:13. Always from above. And when I'd ask who it was, they'd say, "The house settling." But it wasn't settling. It was remembering. I rose, bare feet on cold wood, a body. Not entirely mine anymore. Like the house had reached inside and borrowed a bit of me to find what it had lost. I climbed the stairs to the attic. Each step moaned in a dialect only the house spoke. And when I reached the top, the door was already open, but I never left it open. The attic was darker than I remembered. Not from lack of light, but from the way the shadows leaned. They curved inward, as if bowing toward the center of the room. And in the middle, a box, unmarked, dustless, impossible, because I had never seen it before, yet recognized it instantly. It had been mine, a memory box, the kind you make in school as a child, where you keep trinkets and drawings and secrets I hadn't thought of. It, in decades, hadn't even remembered hiding it up here, but there it was, waiting, just like the chair. I sat cross-legged before it. My hands trembled not from cold, but from anticipation, from the kind of knowing that only forgotten things give. Off. and when I opened it, the first item was a ribbon, faded blue with a tear near the center. I remembered it from a school play. I had worn it on my wrist, but it wasn't mine. It belonged to her, to the girl. I called my mirror back then Elisa. She was my twin in spirit, though we weren't. Related to, same age, same eyes, same silence. She disappeared the same year I stopped talking. Everyone said she moved, that her parents had taken her away suddenly, but I remembered her telling me, the day before she vanished, if I go missing, check the mirror in the attic. That's where I'll be. I never checked until now. Behind the ribbon was a photograph, cracked at the edges, faded like breath on glass. It was of me, but not just me. I was seated on the mourner's chair, alone in the photo, but my shadow, a towel. My shadow had company, another shape, same size, same outline as Elisa. I dropped the photo, not from fear, from grief, from the kind of ache that only truth brings. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, and the air changed, heavier, like the walls had inhaled and were waiting to exhale. A whisper followed, not words, more like an exhale through teeth, but it said everything. Remember, I stood, suddenly aware of how small I felt, like a child again, like someone who had forgotten how to forget. I turned toward the attic. Mirror, it was cracked, but not broken. The kind of crack that follows a pattern, like a spider web spun in grief, and in it, I didn't see myself. I saw the mourner's chair, empty and then occupied. A shape sat in it, Elisa and Cecilia, me, all three at once, because the house doesn't keep memories like we do. It stacks them, folds them, buries them in corners, lets them bleed through the wood grain, and when you come back, it shows you the parts you threw away. I reached out to the mirror. The glass was warm, and suddenly, I was in the chair again, but not in the attic, back downstairs, in the room surrounded by echoes. Except now, the house was full of mourners, a forgotten family, of versions of me I'd buried under politeness and distance and silence. They weren't ghosts, they were echoes, living memories, and every one of them had something to say. But no one spoke, they just watched. And I knew the next part wasn't about seeing, it was about hearing what the house had always tried to say. I closed my eyes, and I remembered the moment first sat in that chair as a child, how it creaked like it was adjusting to my weight, how it sighed. Yes, the chair sighed, and it whispered, not yet. I had forgotten that moment, because the chair hadn't chosen me then, it had only tested me now. I was ready, and the house had remembered. I opened my eyes, alone in the room again, but something had changed. The photo I'd dropped, it's gone, replaced with a letter, folded neatly on my lap. No name, no handwriting, just presence. I unfolded it. It read, some chairs don't wait for the right person. They wait for the right memory to come back. I didn't know what it meant, not yet, but I knew where. I had to go next, back into the attic, back into the mirror, back into the places the house had kept safe for me, because grief isn't just loss, it's location, and the house was the map. The chair didn't stop rocking after I left. Some chairs are not built to rock, not by design, not by intention, not by the craftsman's hand, and yet there it was, rocking alone, without wind, without weight, as if something within it refused stillness, as if stillness itself had become too loud. I stood at the doorway, staring at it, the mourner's chair, back in its place, tucked in the shadowed corner of the sitting room. But this time, it was moving, not violently, not dramatically, just enough to be undeniable, back, and forth, back, and forth, as if caught in a lullaby, No one had sung for generations. I hadn't told anyone what happened the day before. The attic, the mirror, the photograph, the letter. Some truths don't survive retelling. They wilt beneath language. They belong to silence. But the chair wasn't staying silent anymore. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, measured, heavy. The wood groaned as I approached. Not the floorboards, the chair itself, like it sensed my presence, like it remembered me. And in that moment, something occurred to me. I was no longer just a mourner. I was becoming a keeper of echoes, memory, of whatever the chair needed to pass on. I didn't sit, not yet. Instead, I crouched beside it, watched the slow rock of its frame, listened, and then I heard it, a sound, faint, rhythmic, wet, like a pen scratching across damp parchment. I looked underneath, nothing, but the sound grew louder, and that's when I noticed. There was something beneath the cushion, a small slit in the fabric, carefully stitched, unassuming. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the seam, the chair stopped moving, as if waiting. I opened the seam gently. The fabric gave easily, like it wanted to be undone, and inside, a letter, sealed, yellowed, unmarked. My name wasn't on it, but my initials were. Not mine now, mine then, from when I was a child. I hadn't written this, but someone had to me. I unfolded it with hands that didn't feel like mine. The ink had bled slightly, but the words were clear. You promised you'd come back. My breath caught, because I remembered now. It's a pact I made. I was 7, alone after another funeral, sitting in the chair when no one was looking. I had whispered to it, "If I leave, will you wait for me?" And in my imagination, the chair had answered. I had promised to return, but I never did. Not until now. The room darkened, or maybe it was just a realization pulling the light from the air. The letter continued. You left your grief with me. I kept it warm. A grief left too long becomes something else. I looked up the mirror on the far wall, cracked, like the one in the attic. But this one was new, hadn't been cracked yesterday. And in the reflection, the chair rocked again, but I wasn't in it. Someone else was. She looked like me, older, worn, like a version of myself who had never left this house, who had stayed, who had kept every memory, every secret. She looked at me through the glass and smiled. You left me behind, she said. I dropped the letter, backed away, but the chair didn't stop rocking. The reflection didn't vanish. She stood and mirrored me and walked toward the glass, not in fear, in invitation. The room grew colder, not physically, emotionally, like the space remembered every funeral it had ever hosted, and it asked me in a silence louder than screams, will you finish what you began? I approached the mirror, my own face, no longer visible, only hers, the keeper. She reached out, so did I, and the glass didn't stop me. I was pulled in, not with violence, with memory. Suddenly, was seated in the chair, not in the house, in the in-between, that space that exists between mourning and remembering, between forgetting and forgiveness. Around me, rows of chairs, each with a person, each with a silence. Some cried, some stared forward, some held letters they hadn't yet opened, and I understood. This was where all unspoken grief went, to sit, to breathe, to wait. A voice spoke beside me, low, measured, familiar. They don't need to be read to be heard. I turned. It was Elisa, or a version of her. She held my ribbon, the one from the box, wrapped around her wrist like a reminder. You found it, she said. I nodded. I didn't ask how she was here, or if she was alive, because in this place, those things didn't matter. Here, people were memories, and memories were alive. I waited, she whispered. The house did too, but it was the chair that remembered best. I wanted to speak, to apologize, but words crumbled in my throat. Instead, I offered the letter, the one I had found. She shook her head. It wasn't from me. It was from you. It's the version of you who stayed. She pointed behind me. There I was, again, sitting in the chair, silent, still, but my eyes were open and crying. I had forgotten how to grieve, so the chair had done it for me, held the sorrow, held the weight, held me until I was ready to remember. I reached for my own hand, touched the shoulder of the seated version of myself, and in that instant, I returned, back in the house, back in the room. The mirror was intact. The chair was still, but on the floor, a trail of letters, each with a name, each unopened. Not for me, but for someone. The chair had more stories to tell, and I was beginning to understand I wasn't the only one who had left something behind. The mourner who never left. Some people never leave a funeral, not because their bodies stay behind, but because their silence does. Because their last breath, the one they didn't dare exhale, clings to the wood, the dust, the fabric of grief. The mourner's chair remembered, and I had begun to understand why, after the mirror closed behind me, I didn't move for what felt like hours. The room was unchanged, same shadows, same scent of wilting flowers and old wood, but the weight in the air had shifted, like something had stepped out of hiding, or someone on the floor. The letters still lay scattered, some sealed, some open, none addressed to anyone I recognized, except one. One had only 2 words on it, for her. No name, just that, and I knew instantly they meant the mourner who never left. She had a name once, but no one in the family spoke it anymore. Not from anger, from forgetting. Her portrait had hung above the staircase for decades. I remembered her face vaguely, a soft smile that looked borrowed, eyes that never quite met yours. They said she was an aunt, or a cousin, maybe both. No one could agree. All they knew was she came to one funeral and never really left. They found her sitting in the mourner's chair 2 days after the burial, still, eyes wide, not dead, but not fully alive either, like grief had poured into her and hardened, turned her to something almost human. She was taken to a care facility, but the house never let go of her. Neither did the chair. I held the letter. Its weight didn't come from paper. It came from memory. I opened it slowly, like peeling back skin from an old scar. Inside, if she still sits, is because the goodbye was never said. Some souls don't need rest. They need witness. I didn't understand, but I knew where. I had to go. There was a room in the back of the house, one no one ever entered. It's to be the sunroom. Now it was a shade room. Drapes always drawn, door always slightly ajar, but never inviting. I went there, letter in hand, heart pressed against ribs like it was trying to escape. She was there, not a ghost, not a memory. Her body, aged, small, still breathing, sitting in a chair, not the mourner's chair, but one very much like it, worn, carved with time, sunk in from years of sitting. Her eyes were open, looking at nothing or everything. I didn't speak. I simply entered, and the moment I did, she blinked once, a slow, deliberate gesture, a signal, not just of awareness, of recognition. I stepped closer. The room was thick with time. The air tasted old, like it had been held in lungs for too long. I knelt before her and placed the letter on her lap. She didn't look down, but she raised one hand, shaking, translucent, a whisper of flesh she touched. The envelope and the room sighed. The drapes fluttered. No wind, the shadows shifted. No light. The house was reacting, remembering, witnessing. She spoke. One word. Elisa. My breath caught, because that name, it didn't belong to her. It belonged to my childhood, to the girl in the mirror, to the ribbon in the box. I whispered back, "You knew her?" She blinked again. I was her. I couldn't understand, but I didn't need to. Grief bends time, twists identity, makes strangers of our own reflections. She held out her hand. I took it. It was like holding silk wrapped in bone. She leaned forward, slightly, eyes locked with mine. The chair didn't just remember you. It held me until you returned. I felt something in my chest break open. Not pain, not sorrow. Space. A hollow where silence had lived too long. She nodded once, satisfied, then leaned back, closed her eyes, and exhaled. Long, slow, like someone finishing a sentence decades in the making. She didn't die. Not in the way we understand. She simply left. The chair was empty. The name written inside the chair. There are names we carry in silence, not because we forgot them, because they were never meant to be spoken aloud. Not in rooms with light, not where others can hear. Some names belong only to the wood, to the carved corners of chairs that remember more than we do. The house had grown quieter since she left. Not empty, just still. A stillness that doesn't come from absence, from resolution, from things no longer waiting. But the mourner's chair still stood in the same spot, upright, unmoving, yet heavy with presence, like it had one more secret to share. I approached it differently now. No longer as a stranger, no longer afraid. I had sat, I had listened, and the chair had given back what it had held for years. But I sensed something was left. Not grief, identity, I remembered what she said before exhaling. The chair didn't just remember you. It held me. What did she mean? She was Eliza. Or Eliza. Was it her? Or was the name never meant to match a single face? I knelt beside the chair again. This time, not looking underneath. It's not searching for letters, but letting my hand run across the grain, fingers tracing the woodwork. And that's when I felt it. A ridge, a line, then another, a small indentation, a carving on the underside of the armrest, barely visible, but unmistakably intentional. I pulled out my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and tilted the chair slightly. There it was, 3 letters, worn by time, but still intact. Lev, not initials, I recognized. At least, not yet. But the moment I saw them, a shiver ran up my spine. The air grew dense. My vision blurred for a second, and I was somewhere else. A memory, not mine. Maybe a memory the chair shared with me. A younger version of the house. Sunlight pouring through lace curtains, laughter echoing off the walls. A girl, maybe 12, sitting in the chair, barefoot, sketching something on a folded napkin. Her face intense, determined. She was carving those same letters into the wood. Each stroke deliberate. Each breath held as if engraving something into time itself. She whispered as she worked, "So, you remember me, even when they don't." And the chair answered by holding her shape. The vision broke. I was back in the present, but my hands were trembling. Lev. I searched the attic again that night. This time, deeper, past the obvious boxes, into corners no one had touched in years. And there, inside an old chest beneath a rotted wedding dress, I found it. A journal, leather-bound, edges frayed, smelling of cedar and decay. Embossed on the cover, Liana Elise Vale. Lev. I had never heard her name, not once in my family stories. But as I flipped through the pages, I realized why. Because she was never meant to be remembered. She had been the black thread, the echo that didn't match the harmony, different. Not in the ways you speak about at dinner tables, okay? But in the ones that make relatives exchange glances. Quiet the room, she had visions, talked to shadows, sat in empty chairs and called them. Full dot, and where she wrote it all down. Her journal was not a diary, it was a confession of dreams that bled into waking hours, of funerals when no one died except time, of the chair, always the chair. She had named it the listener. She believed the chair could carry messages from one mourner to another, from past to future. She called it a threshold. Rocks because it isn't resting, she wrote. It carries stories between the breath and the silence. One passage stood out, a full page written in dark, bold strokes. They'll try to bury me with silence, but if the chair holds my name, I will always answer. Closed the journal, hands numb. Some part of me wondered, had the chair brought me here? Leona led me through these letters, mirrors, and memories, because her voice hadn't yet finished its sentence, because something still needed to be said. I brought the journal down to the sitting room, placed it on the chair, watched, waited. Nothing moved, but felt it, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards, a pulsing awareness, then a single page turned by itself to a blank section near the end. One line now written in fresh ink. Say it. I didn't speak, but I sat, let the silence stretch between us, and whispered the name aloud for the first time in decades. Leona Elise Vale. The chair creaked, not with weight, but with memory, and then it stopped, completely still, not because it was empty, but because it was finished. The house felt lighter, not brighter, not cheerful, just unburdened, like the furniture had exhaled, like the rooms had made peace. I didn't tell anyone about the journal. Didn't need to, because the chair would remember it always did. As I left the room, I passed the mirror. This time, no reflection out of place, only me, but I smiled because I saw something different, not someone watching, but someone walking away. Finally, not everything that sits the mourner's chair is meant to stay, but some do, until their name is spoken, until their silence is given form, until someone cares enough to kneel beside a chair and trace the grooves of grief with reverence. And then, only then, can the house truly rest, with the mirror left behind. Mirrors are not made to reflect us, not really. They echo what we expect to see, give back what we've trained ourselves to believe is there. But beneath the surface, beneath the silver and glass, they store something else, what the room doesn't say, what the soul won't admit, what the house itself hides. And that night, after whispering Leona's name, after watching the chair still for the first time, I passed by the hallway mirror once more, only this time it didn't reflect me, not entirely. What I saw was slower my face, but aged, my hands, but smaller, a flicker of movement, a second too late, like memory catching up with the body, like something was peeling back the layers and showing me the version of myself that had never left the house, the one the chair remembered, the one the mirror waited for. I should have walked past it, but something held me, a whisper without sound, a pull without weight, and I stepped closer. On the corner of the mirror's wooden frame, I noticed it for the first time, an engraving, not recent, but not ancient either, almost identical in style to the one on the chair. Small initials, L-E-V. Again, Leona. Elise Vale had marked this too, or maybe it had marked her. The mirror pulsed, no light, no movement, but a pulse, like breath, like waiting. And then I saw something move in the reflection, behind me, but when I turned, the hallway was empty. Only the same faded wallpaper, a slight creak of wood underfoot, but the mirror, it had changed. Not what it showed, but what it withheld. There was a drawer beneath the frame, small, almost invisible. I hadn't noticed it before. It was carved into the mirror frame itself, locked, but as I pressed it gently, slid open with the sound of splinters letting go. Inside, a single folded photograph, a tiny silver key. The photograph was old, Sepia tones faded into yellow. Edges curled. It showed a woman standing beside the mourner's chair. Not sitting, just hovering, like she couldn't quite bring herself to touch it. Her face was turned slightly. But something in her posture was me. Not literally, but undeniably familiar. A mirror of soul, if not of skin, written on the back. She never sat, 'cause she was the one the chair waited for. I looked again at the key. It was delicate, worn with use. The kind of thing meant for something precious, or dangerous, or both. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too alert. Every board seemed to breathe. Every hinge whispered. I wandered until morning, not aimless, following something, and by dawn, I found it in the farthest part of the attic. Beneath the dust cloth and forgotten trunks was a small wooden box, locked, carved into the top, the symbol I'd come to expect. Lee V. I inserted the key, turned it. The box opened with a sigh. Inside was a mirror, but not just any. This one was different. Its surface was black, not reflective, not transparent, like obsidian, like memory itself. I lifted it carefully, and as I did, a note fell from beneath it, handwritten. If you see yourself, you've gone too far. Look for the one who stayed behind. So was the room, but my heart, it was full. On my way out, I saw ITA new letter placed on the mourner's chair. No envelope, just folded parchment. I opened it. Thank you for sitting with what no one else would. The house didn't creak. The floor didn't groan. It was silent, but not empty. For the first time, the silence felt like peace. Not mourning. I left the room, but part of me stayed. Not trapped, rooted, connected. Because once you sit in the mourner's chair, you never really get up. You carry it with you, a portable grief, a sacred witness, and some part of you will always listen for the echo of a breath that was never quite released. I stared into the glass. Nothing, not even shadow. And then a flicker. A girl, barefoot, holding a ribbon, running through a version of the house, not touched by time. She was humming, not a song I knew, but one my bones remembered. A lullaby for the forgotten. She paused at the mourner's chair, set the ribbon down, whispered something, and disappeared. I blinked. Now I was staring at myself again, not the reflection. The memory of one. The mirror had shown me what the house still held, what it never buried, what it couldn't. I placed the black mirror beside the original one in the hallway. They didn't reflect each other. They pulsed in rhythm, as if in conversation. And I understood. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by reflections that never got to become real, by versions of us that were left unfinished, by identities denied, by names whispered in shadows, but never in daylight. I left the hallway. Let the mirrors talk. Let them tell each other what I was no longer afraid to hear. Because once you name what was hidden, once you honor what the furniture remembers, the silence becomes sacred, not heavy, not oppressive, sacred. The house didn't change that day. It remained old, wooden, worn, but the shadows no longer stretched so long. The chair no longer creaked without reason. In the mirror now, it reflected not just the present, but the healing of every version of me that once sat in NCE. The breath still in the walls. There are houses that speak through the floorboards, groaning when it rains, sighing when someone slams a door. But this house, this one held its breath, and I had started to hear it again. Not like before. Not the panic of footsteps or the dread of unseen things. This breath was gentler, wounded, perhaps, but persistent. The kind of breath you hear when someone is falling, asleep, or just beginning to wake up. After the mirror showed me what it remembered, I noticed something strange. The air was warmer in some rooms, colder in others. The same hallway could shift temperatures within a single step. The living room, where the mourner's chair sat in silence, always stayed neutral, balanced, like the heart of the house had settled into a resting pulse. But the upstairs bedroom, the one I never stayed in, the one locked since the day I arrived, pulsed with cold, like lungs that hadn't inhaled in years. I found the key taped beneath one of the old dresser drawers. I hadn't been looking for it, just cleaning, wiping dust from things I barely touched, letting the mundane lull me into forgetfulness. But the moment my fingers brushed that strip of old tape, my pulse changed, the same way it had in the attic, the same way it had in the hallway. Recognition, not in the mind, but in the body. The key was small, dull silver, shaped like a tooth. I walked to the upstairs bedroom slowly, not out of fear, but out of respect, like visiting someone who had been left waiting too long. The lock turned easily. No resistance, no sound, just a quiet release. I opened the door, and the cold swallowed me whole. Not a cold that bit at the skin, the kind that made the heart remember something it hadn't mourned. The room was untouched. A single bed, a wooden writing desk, bookshelf, all covered in dust, but no cobwebs, no mold, as if the air had been holding vigil. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and listened. There was a rhythm here, faint, like breath pressed into the walls, like someone had once breathed so deeply, so meaningfully, that their rhythm etched itself into the grain of the wood. I placed my hand on the wall beside the desk, and it was warm, alive, not with heat, but with presence. I sat at the desk, opened the drawer. Inside were letters, dozens, all addressed to no one. No names, no stamps, just folded paper, sealed with wax. Each letter had one symbol on the outside. Not leave something else, a spiral, drawn in ink. Each one hand done, slightly different, but unmistakably deliberate. I broke the seal on the top letter. Read, this house doesn't forget. Not the footsteps, not the silence, not the breath we tried to leave behind. If you're reading this, then the chair has spoken to you. The mirror has returned something you left. The key found you when you weren't looking. That means you're ready. I read the next one. You're not here to fix the house. You're here to let it fix you. Every corner you avoided holds a version of you that begged to be seen. Every stair creak is your hesitation. Every locked door was a conversation you refused to have. The letters weren't instructions. They were reminders, as if someone knew exactly what I'd feel, what I'd question, what I'd deny. And instead of answering, they left these echoes behind pages that breathed when I opened them. That warmed the room with memory. I laid all the letters out on the bed, one by one. The spiral on each cover seemed to pulse, not visually, but symbolically, as if I was being drawn inward, deeper into the center of something myself. The house, both. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and I heard it, the breath, not in the room, not in the walls, but inside me, perfectly in rhythm with the house. And I realized I had matched it. I was no longer out of sync, no longer an intruder walking through a stranger's grief. I was the grief, the memory, its echo that had come home. A creak behind me. I turned. The closet door, once shut, now slightly ajar. I stepped toward it, opened it. Inside, a coat, a pair of shoes, a small wooden box. I reached for the box, opened it. Inside, cracked hand mirror, the kind carried in a purse, worn, framed in faded gold, and scrawled along the edge. To the breath that stayed, thank you for returning. I wept, not loudly, just enough to let something go, just enough to let the house hear me to tell it. I understood now. The breath in the walls wasn't just memory. It was a request to be noticed, to be matched, to be honored. I stayed in that room for hours, didn't read any more letters, didn't move anything, just breathed, listened, let the spiral pull me inward until I no longer felt separate, until I no longer questioned why I came. And as night fell and the house exhaled, once more the room grew warm, for the first time in decades, where the spiral ends. They say spirals symbolize growth, not circles which return, but spirals which deepen. And if that's true, then I wasn't just wandering through grief anymore. I was sinking, layer by layer, breath by breath, not toward despair, but toward a stillness I hadn't yet earned, one I was meant to reach only once I was ready to stop turning away. That night, sleep didn't come in the usual way. There were no dreams, just space, wide, dark, and silent, but not empty, the kind of silence that listens, the kind that waits. And when I opened my eyes again, there was no sun, no moonlight, only the faint glow of something pulsing just beneath the floorboards. I followed it, not as a command, but as instinct, the way lungs move without thought, the way a name forms in your throat before you realize it, down the stairs, past the hallway, to the base of the bookshelf in the room where the mourner's chair sat like an altar, and there, at the edge of the spiral, carved into the floor, a knot in the wood pulsed with warmth. I pressed it, it clicked, and the bookshelf shuddered, not forward, not to the side, but backward. A door disguised as memory. It opened slowly, as if remembering how behind it, a narrow staircase descending into the dark. I stood at the edge for a moment, letting the air touch my skin. It was warm, but ancient, heavy with breath, never spoken aloud. I stepped forward. The spiral was leading me not toward knowledge, but surrender, toward the center of what had never been voiced, toward the root of the house's grief and my own. The staircase creaked beneath me, each step releasing a sigh like pages being turned in a book never finished. And at the bottom, I found it, a circular room, stone walls, no windows, just a single chair, tentacle to the mourner's chair upstairs, but inverted, where that one was built for sitting. This one was built for waiting. The wood was worn, but untouched. A thick layer of dust coated the seat, but no cobwebs, no insects, no rot, as if time had respected the silence here in the center of the room, drawn into the stone floor. Was the spiral dot large, precise, and at its core, a box, small, metal, closed. I approached it, knelt, touched the lid. It was cold, colder than anything I had felt in the house, colder than memory, and carved across its surface, not with initials, but with a single sentence. Not all grief ends with goodbye. I opened it. Inside, a letter, sealed, unmarked, and beside it, a lock of hair, red, still vibrant, as if it had been waiting for air to remember it. I broke the seal, unfolded the page, and read, "If you've come this far, then you already know the truth. That silence has a shape, that absence can hum louder than presence, that some chairs hold more than the weight of the body. This room is not a grave. It is a memory that refused to die. Spiral ends here because the forgetting ends here, not because the pain disappears, but because the voice returns. I am not Liana. I am not the girl who hummed in the attic. I am the breath that stayed. I am the cry that was never heard. I am you before the silence." I dropped the letter, fell to my knees, and wept, not out of sorrow, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The spiral was never a path to find someone else. It was the return to the part of myself I buried long ago. I sat in the waiting chair. Let it hold me. Let it know I had returned. Let it feel that I finally heard what it had been trying to say. And the air shifted. A breeze moved through the sealed room. Impossible, but real. And with it, the dust lifted from the chair, from the floor, from the spiral itself. And the room began to breathe. I closed my eyes, and I saw them. All the versions of myself I had lost. The girl who smiled too much to hide the trembling. The child who listened through walls for words never spoken. Woman who asked for silence and mistook it for safety. They were all here, standing around me, not haunting, not witnessing, not honoring, breathing with me, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone in the house, because I was the house, and the spiral. It didn't end. It opened. The visitor who was never named. Some people knock, right there. Names in dust. Others leave things behind. A ribbon, a scent, a whisper in the woodwork. But not this visitor. This one had no name, no face, and yet they had always been here. Not haunting, not warning, witnessing. After I sat in the chair in the spiral room, I expected something to break. A sound, a tear in the air, an unraveling of what had kept itself hidden. But instead, a silence grew warmer, like it was preparing to say something it had rehearsed for years. I stood, slowly, folding the letter again, placing it back into the box beside the lock of red hair. And just as I touched the lid, a breath, not my own, slipped across my shoulder. It wasn't air. It was knowing. I turned around. No one stood there, but I could feel them, as if their absence had form. Wait, history? Not a ghost, not a spirit, but the shape of something never named. The space between the things we lost. I climbed the steps back to the main house, not hurried, not afraid, more like waking up after a dream so long you forgot which version of you had fallen asleep. The hallway was darker than before, but not in the way light behaves. It was darker because something had arrived, or perhaps finally allowed itself to be seen, and in the middle of it, in the heart of that heavy silence, sat the mourner's chair, exactly where it always was, but different now. It was no longer waiting, it was watching. I sat across from it on the floor, legs folded, palms on the wood. The floor was warmer, buzzing slightly, alive in a way that reminded me of skin under sunlight. And then I said it. Not a name, not a question, just, I know you're here. Something shifted, not outside me, inside. The kind of shift that happens when your bones remember what your mind tried to forget. The kind of knowing that doesn't arrive through logic, but through surrender. And then I felt them, behind me, to my right, in the wall, in the mirror, in the breath of the wood, all around. The visitor, the unnamed one, not an it, not a they, just a presence, one that hadn't come to hurt, but to remind. I whispered again, why now, till, I thought. House responded, not in words, but in a sequence. The lights flickered. Once, a floorboard creaked. Upstairs, the mirror in the hallway clouded for a moment. The wind chimed outside the kitchen window, the one that never rang, sang a single note, and then silence, but not emptiness. Silence so full you could hear it breathing. I stood up slowly, walked toward the mirror, and saw not myself, but a room I'd never seen. A small child's bedroom, paint peeling, toy blocks scattered on the floor and sitting on the bed. A child with no eyes, just shadows where they should be. Not horrifying, but quiet, like someone who had cried their whole childhood out of their face and left nothing behind but stillness. They lifted their head, mouthed something, but I couldn't hear it. I blinked. The mirror was normal again, my reflection, but with a faint outline behind me that vanished as soon as I noticed. The visitor hadn't come to scare me. They came to return what was hidden, and not just mine. That night, I opened every drawer, every cabinet, every sealed box in the attic, a letter that had once been too much to bear. I read them aloud to no one, to everyone, to the visitor, to the child, in the mirror, to the spiral beneath the floor. And for every word I spoke, the air grew warmer, more forgiving, less afraid. I spoke names I never wanted to say, described griefs I hadn't earned, confessed to memories I wasn't sure were mine, and with each confession, the visitor stepped closer, still unseen, still unnamed, but present in the final hour of the night. I returned to the mourner's chair, sat in it, let it know. This time, it wasn't just a visitor. I was listening, and in that stillness, I felt it, a hand not on my shoulder, but on the air above it, a pressure, a blessing, a memory, a homecoming. No name was ever given, because not all things meant to be loved are meant to be named. Some must simply be recognized. The visitor left no note, no gift, no final whisper, only a breath held in the hallway, carried in the mirror, echoed in the wood, and for the first time, exhaled without fear. The chair remembers the name you forgot. Names are strange things. We're taught to wear them like skin, defining, enclosing, explaining. But some names are too old for language. Some are not spoken, but remembered through grief, through silence, through the soft curve of a breath held too long. And the house knew mine before I did. The morning came slowly, a creeping light, through the broken curtains like memory leaking through walls. I hadn't slept, not really, but my body felt rested, not light, not unburdened, but aligned, as if something heavy had shifted from pressing down to simply being held in the house. It was listening differently now, not waiting, not warning, but welcoming. I rose from the mourner's chair. It creaked beneath me, not in protest, but in partying, a sound that said, "Thank you for staying long enough to hear." And that's when I felt it, the pulse, not mine, not the house. So I'm submerged, rhythmic, unified. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. My reflection met me, but behind my eyes, there was someone else, not haunting, not watching, but returning. The girl I had buried in silence. The version of me that swallowed the scream. The child who understood too much too early. She was not broken. She was waiting. The spiral had not been a map. It was a signature, an imprint of something. It's ancient, pressed into the stone of Selfa, and now it was complete. But that didn't mean the story ended, because once the spiral closes, you begin again from the center. I walked back to the room beneath, the house, the hidden chamber, the spiral room. The metal box still sat at its core, but beside it, it's now a chair, the one I had sat, and it was empty, but not unoccupied. There was warmth in its shape, memory in the cushion. The room remembered me, and more importantly, it remembered the name I had forgotten. Not the name given at birth, not the one whispered in grief, but the true name, the one that speaks of why I was ever here at all. I sat again, closed my eyes, and asked aloud, what did I forget? No echo returned, no voice from the walls, just a slow wind rising from below the floor, soft as forgiveness. And then I heard it, the name, my name, the real one, not with ears, but with skin. It brushed against my spine, curled in my ribs, lit up the scars behind my eyes. A name without sound, just meaning it meant. The one who held silence like a lantern. The one who buried what she thought could not be forgiven. The one who came back anyway. And when I opened my eyes, the spiral glowed faintly, then dimmed. Not ending, but ceiling complete. I stood up, walked slowly back to the surface. The house met me without hesitation. Every door open, every hallway warm, every room breathing in rhythm, and on the front door, taped loosely, as if just placed a letter, sealed with a spiral. I opened it. No ink, just the faint imprint of a hand, and the scent of cedar. No words needed. The house had said everything. I stepped outside. The sky was gray, but not ominous, just honest, like a sky that had wept enough and was ready for quiet. I looked back at the house. It didn't wave, didn't blink, but it acknowledged. And in that moment, I understood Thai had never lived there. The house had lived through me. The mourner's chair would remain for the next one, for the next echo, for the next person brave enough to sit in silence and listen. Because grief never ends. It just changes chairs, and memory never dies. It just waits for a name strong enough to call it home. Again, I walked down the hill, through the trees, past the old fence that creaked without wind, and in my pocket, the cracked hand mirror, still warm, still warm, still old, still witnessing somewhere in another town. Another mourner sits in silence, unaware, unspeaking, but beginning to feel the pull of the spiral. And when they are ready, the house will open, the breath will rise, and the chair will remember the name they forgot.